Welcome to A-Team Group's RegTech Summit Virtual Event 2020. We'd like to thank our platinum sponsors, SmartStream and Bureau van Dijk, our gold sponsors, the Derivative Service Bureau, ACA Compliance Group, AWS Partner Network, Axiom SL, Capitec, Univista, Automated Intelligence, and Flamin KYC Software, and our event partner, the UK Department for International Trade. Connect with your peers on the networking page, and if you have questions for our speakers, please use the comment function next to the live stream. Thank you for attending and enjoy the session.
Hello everybody and welcome to day 5, the final day of our RegTech Summit virtual event. Today's theme is maintaining operational resilience to support the new normal environment. As a parent of 6-year-old twins who have been sent home due to an incidence of COVID-19 in their bubble at school, I'm very much looking forward to learning about how to maintain operational resilience during this time. But all joking aside, looking forward to a good session today on how to deal with this new normal as we see it, or at least as our panelists see it. Not too much to hear from me today. If you've been with us throughout the week, as I say, it's day 5. You know the drill. Quick reminder really to use Slido to ask questions of our panelists and to vote in the polls. I should take this opportunity to thank once again all of our speakers for their generosity in time and sharing their expertise with us. And of course, thanks to our sponsors for their support. Special thanks today goes to sponsors ACA Compliance Group and Automated Intelligence. I should remind you once again to visit the networking and sponsors sections to enter prize draws. Some good prizes on offer. Not sure when they're due to be decided, but you've got to be in it to win it. So we're still live. Go and check those out. And finally, for the last time from me, probably, I'd like to emphasize that without our sponsors' support, this free event would not be possible. So please do take the time to connect with them, check out what they have to say. Okay, let's get on with the show. So for today, the first session we have is a RegTech startup elevator pitch from Contract Zen, who have a 1-minute video to showcase their offering. So over to them.
Hi there, my name is Markus Mikkola. I'm the founder and CEO of ContractZen, the digital governance hub in the cloud. Global business has changed profoundly. Companies all over the world face more competition, regulation, and compliance requirements than ever before. However, at the moment, companies in all industries lack the speed and agility to react to the growing number of audits, M&A transactions, and due diligence situations. ContractZen is a revolutionary cloud-based self-service governance solution. It gives birth to a new solution category for easy creation, management, and secure sharing of contracts, meeting minutes, as well as other governance, risk, and compliance documents. ContractZen has customers from over 30 countries around the world, from small startups and non-profits to large corporations like Total and JCDecaux. We help organizations throughout the world to be due diligence ready every day, bringing peace of mind to executives, investors, and boards. That's why our name is ContractZen.
Even better if I'm on mute. I was about to say that You can follow up with Contract Zen and set up a virtual meeting or a chat with Marcus, who is here at the event. So if you got the chance, go and do that. That would be great. Okay, so let's turn to our live panel. Maintaining resilience and managing evolving risks to support new business and operating models with agile and enhanced compliance. This session will be moderated by Stephen Livermore. Steve is an industry advisor and consultant specializing in risk, compliance, monitoring, surveillance, and regulatory change. He's got over 30 years of industry leading expertise in compliance and operational risk across domestic and international marketplaces. Before he formed his own independent consultancy in 2019, Steve spent 10 years at UBS, where he held roles as global head of monitoring, surveillance and controls, and global head of intelligence capabilities. Welcome, Steve, and let me hand things over to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for that kind introduction. And may I also extend a welcome to all our viewers today. And thanks for joining the panel on what you heard from Andrew, a rather bit of a mouthful, maintaining resilience and managing evolving risks to support new business and operating models with agile and enhanced compliance. I appreciate it's very late in a busy week, day 5 as we heard, and a very busy week of content from 18. So I'm truly thankful for your engagement today. I'm delighted to be joined with a very broad and experienced panel today with backgrounds in both the buy and the sell side, as well as consultancy and technology environments. I'm sure, like me, you're looking forward to healthy debate and informative input. So firstly, I'd like to ask each of the panelists just to briefly introduce themselves and their primary responsibilities and their interest in RegTech. So perhaps firstly, we'll go to David Cowland, who's the Head of Compliance Operations at Fidelity.
Hi, Stephen, thanks for the intro. Yes, so at Fidelity International, I think my interest has really been running the RegTech initiative at Fidelity now since about 2017. So very interested in the sort of like capabilities that regulatory technology can bring to improving compliance and how we can move compliance to a kind of more forward-thinking, technology-driven organization.
Great, thank you. Also from the industry, Nitsan Solomon, who's the EMEA Head of Surveillance and Financial Crime Technology at Nomura.
Yeah, hello, everyone. A-Team, thank you for having me today. So yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Nitsan. I'm the head of the Surveillance and Financial Crime Technology at Nomura for the EMEA region. I'm personally coming from an IT background, and I'm a firm believer in data and in technology as an enabler and as a driver for effectiveness and efficiency in the compliance space.
Great, thanks, Nitsan.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to Mark Salter, the Director of Client Development at ACA Compliance Group.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everybody. As Steve mentioned, I am a Client Director of ACA's Technology Solutions here in EMEA and the APAC region. Prior to being at ACA, I've spent the last 5 years focusing on trade surveillance technology platforms for both the buy and the sell side.
Great, thank you, welcome. And finally, Simon Cole, the CEO for Automated Intelligence.
Hi, thank you, Steve. It's great to be here. Yes, so Simon Cole, CEO of Automated Intelligence. We help organizations to take control of their unstructured data so they can identify the risk within that data and also identify value within it. I've been working with regulations around information since they first existed, which is too long ago to remember, but somewhere in the 90s. In a different space, more in government, but it's been a fascinating journey to see it evolve to where it is today.
Super. Thanks all. And just before we get going with the questions, as you heard earlier from Andrew, there's a poll that I'd like all of the attendees perhaps to take a look at through the Slido app, where you'll also be able to post any questions and questions that you'd like to pose to the group. I'll try and introduce those as we go through. However, we'll certainly have some time at the end of the session, which should last just under an hour, to pose those. So please feel free to fill up my inbox. So let's move on to the poll question. The question is, what are your top compliance concerns around the new COVID-19 working conditions? So we've got 5 options. Are they market abuse concerns? Would they be financial crime, fraud and AML issues? Perhaps surveillance, voice and e-comms recording? Perhaps trade and transaction reporting? Or finally, the remote working environment, managing the employees and the behavioural risks? So if your own time, everybody would like to provide an answer to that poll, appreciate that all of them are probably slightly concerning, but if you could select your most relevant, that would be appreciated. And as we wait for those answers to come in, we'll kick off with the first question. I think through the last year, we've seen a huge challenge on all organisations. Financial services hit, like everybody else, very hard from the start. It's been widely reported by certain senior managers at organisations and perhaps filtering through that although there were some initial teething challenges for banks to overcome to be able to operate from home, they've seemed to have been able to do so almost as well as they did in the office previously. So what have we learned, and what are the top risks and challenges that we're now facing? I think perhaps we'll start with the industry SMEs on this one. So Nitsan, would you like to take that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the first thing we've learned is that it actually can be done. So, it sounds simple now, but I think at the beginning, a lot of firms were looking at this challenge, and we didn't really know if we can make it work and how long it's going to take. So I think that was quite a positively surprising finding that we have all adjusted and made it work. In terms of the risks, so something interesting that the FCA said earlier this week, they said, well, we should all remember that fundamentally the risks are still the same risks. It's just that they manifest themselves a bit differently in this new environment. So I think that's a really important point to remember. But if we look at these risks, so I think first thing is the information leakage, right? So whether if it's intentional or whether somebody else in your environment just got some of the information you've been talking about. So that's obviously a major concern for us in this industry. Second thing I will say, collusion and market manipulation. So obviously, it's not a supervised environment, or it's not as supervised as what we are used to see. And there's nothing stopping traders and other employees from going on various platforms and discussing. And we could see instances of collusion, prices fixing, etc., market manipulation. The other thing I would say is fraud. So I think, within this environment, we're no longer sort of contained into our own offices, own technology, infrastructure, own environment. So things like identity fraud, other people sending you things externally, using links to Zoom and things like that, it is a major concern for us these days. And also cyber risks, right? Because again, we are outside of our normal environment. So to me, these would be the top risks. In terms of challenges, so I think the greatest challenge is the supervision piece. So again, it's the fact that there is no personal oversight. There is nobody on the floor that can look at what traders and people are doing. So they are free to do whatever they want, and they would normally use unsupervised tools. So if within the environment, we say no use of mobile phones and these sort of things, and we can monitor and we can make sure that happens. Outside of our normal environment, that is not the case. So that is a great challenge. The next I will say is it was more at the beginning of the pandemic, but it could continue on. And that was, we all remember at the beginning, there was a lot of noise due to the market volatility that we saw at the beginning. And I'm sure other colleagues would agree there was a major spike in alerts. So, compliance functions really struggled to deal with the volume of alerts that we were receiving. And in general, it's really difficult to identify market abuse or manipulation when you have a huge amount of noise. So indeed, a very big challenge for us.
Okay, thank you. Huge amount of topics in there. David, is there anything left that we should be concerned about?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's saying Carrie, covered a lot of things. I think sort of working around what she said, and I agree with them. I think lessons learned, being prepared. We were fortunate that we'd already seen a sort of move to working from home, not as extensive as we have had, but we had been making that push. So consequently, in the first week of the lockdown, there was a bit of a rush as the tech teams opened up bandwidth, as 8,000 people worked from home rather than maybe 1,000, but pretty much we were covered. I think the other thing is we've learned that you don't have to have people in offices, right? And I think that's such a big lesson. When I remember people going, well, working from home maybe one day a week. Now we've sort of like learned that we can do what we do and we can do it from home, and there are issues around that. I think some of the top risks and challenges. What will the future of work look like? That's starting to come back now that we've been working from home for like the last 9 months or more. What are we going to do? And I think no one has the answer yet. There's lots of discussions, lots of conferences, lots of webinars, and I think the biggest thing we're going to have to ask people to live with is ambiguity. We're not going to know, right? It's going to take us a year or more to work out exactly how we are going to work in the future and what we are going to do with all that office space that we suddenly find ourselves with, and nobody working at. In terms of the challenges, then I think big things are going to be around. I know Nick was saying about communication surveillance and the whole market abuse. I think that's always been there. I think it does become a bigger issue as people work from home. I think some of the other issues around it will be like conduct risk. Right? We're going to have to really start looking. People aren't in their offices anymore, and there's been a number of surveys out, a number of results out showing that profanities have risen, and as people are working from home, a lot of people kept in check, but you work in a group. We're very social, and so you work in a group. Suddenly when you're at home, maybe some of those checks and balances start to slip, let's say. I think the other challenges are going to be mental health, as people are not really used to working in a kind of isolation for so long. So how are we going to deal with that? And then again, coming back to comm surveillance, video surveillance, and to sort of Nitsan's point around, if people really want to do things wrong, how are we going to view that in the future when everybody's on Zoom and not in the office where you're kind of putting the usual monitoring pieces in place?
Sure. Okay, thank you both. We'll head back to. I see there's a number of responses come back to the poll, which I think are pretty consistent with some of the messages that you've both given. But before we do that, we'll just pick off a second question. I think it connects to where we're at. Often firms will look to the regulator for guidance and a steer, perhaps, when things change. Have we seen any messaging? Has there been any clear messaging coming from regulators during the past 9 months as we've been wrestling with the challenges of the pandemic? I've seen personally a number of papers, I've seen speeches, but is there anything sort of more formal than that? Are there any key messages that we should be thinking about that the regulators are presenting with us? Perhaps Mark, you'll start us off on that.
Thanks, Dean. Yeah, I mean, we're probably in a bit of a fortunate place, obviously being a compliance business, and a lot of what we do is helping our clients respond to regulatory inquests and preparing them for various mock examinations, both here in Europe, but also predominantly in the US. And what we have found is the regulator, they're open for business and they've carried on as they were beforehand. Their biggest concern is, making sure that firms don't let the standards that they had in place slip, and obviously show some level of adaptability to the new working environment. As you alluded to, obviously the FCA have been quite vocal and almost, I'd argue, a little bit better at articulating what they want firms to be focusing on at the moment. Obviously the market watch papers have been coming out for a while now, but they've created their own dedicated COVID-19 webpage. They've recently published, obviously, the details of their PATR ratio. So they're actually going to some lengths to really spell out to the marketplace what they want you to be doing. They're giving you insight into some of their procedures at how they investigate potential market abuse. Just this week, we've seen the SEC roll out another risk alert. The OEIC have, come out, and their biggest, I say, surprise was that firms have not adapted to the working environment as quickly as they should have done. They're really talking about almost going back to basics and doing a new risk assessment, understanding how your risks have, and we've coined the phrase at ACA, mutated, this level of risk mutation, which goes across to Nitsan's point. The risks are the same, they've just evolved, much like COVID has. So you have to evolve with them. So that's really what we've seen from the regulator. Before coming on the panel, I double checked with some of our consultants. And another thing that they've also seen is that the FCA have gone out recently and have really started to try and understand the financial resilience of a number of firms in the marketplace. I don't think anyone really thought 9 months later we would still be in the same position we are now. So there was a survey that went out during the summer. The responsive have gone back, and I think in the last week or so, a second round of surveys have been sent out by the FCA to market participants, just to kind of gauge, where they are.
Thank you. Very, very helpful. And maybe back to David, is from a practitioner's point of view. Is there anything to add to Mark's points?
I think Mark's again covered that well. I think I think sometimes we forget that regulators are just people like us, right? And they woke up one day and went, "Oh my God, what the hell are we going to do?" And have been working their way through that in the same way that we have. Just from their perspective. And I can remember back in March and April, the flurry of activity from the regulators as they were checking on our BCP plans, checking on liquidity, asking where all our regulated individuals were, coming up with the same questions, but from their perspective. And then I think it's like settled down. I think as it started to settle down, they started to think about what they need to do. I think the fundamental thing I've seen, beyond any, not real direct contact, I mean, we speak to them all the time, but is the piece that came out around the need to ensure surveillance is at the same level at home as you would see in the office. And that, creates some issues, let's say, or some challenges that we have to start thinking about, because it's not the same as the office. And how are we going to go about doing that? I think that's kind of one of the key things that they're looking at, is suddenly realizing that 80-90% of workers are working from home and not in those environments that we've spent decades setting up and ensuring that we can be compliant, and we've got all the bits in place to make sure that we know we can meet the regulations. Now I'm working in one of my bedrooms. So how do we do that? How are we going to do that? So I think that's where we'll start seeing the regulators push, potentially also seeing regulated individuals potentially coming back into the office. I don't know whether they're going to be able to say that, but I have heard that there was that push to sort of say, well, we want to see the regulated individuals back in the offices because we don't want to see them working out of homes or out of shared workspaces that aren't controlled by employers.
Thank you. Very good. Okay, so I think if we can just now look at the result from the poll, and thank you to everybody that has taken part. It's very consistent with the points that Mark, David and Nitsan have been talking about. Just over half, 53%, see the remote working managing employee risk and behavioural risk, 53%. The bottom two, interestingly, got no votes at all, with market abuse and trade and transaction reporting, with the fin crime and the comms piece sitting in the middle. So far, we've stayed pretty consistent there. Perhaps bearing in mind that outcome, Simon, I'm coming to you. What approaches can financial institutions take then to maintain compliance whilst this remote distributed working model, which I think is certainly there to stay, can be achieved?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think every organization, regardless of where you are, can identify with those challenges around the employee risk and behavioral risk, and doing what we can. And it's a combination of, at this stage, supporting people, but also then making sure that the controls are in place. And for us, and from what we see in the market, that really comes down to data, and ownership of the data. Data is what we give our employees to work on. And that's how we can kind of, I think, best control that, ensuring we have the correct access to data as well. And I think also proactively assessing the additional risks that remote working has introduced into the business. In some ways, we can't stop somebody looking over somebody else's shoulder, or perhaps we actually can, but let's talk about the privacy concerns that brings into the mix at that point when you're working in a home environment. And there's a lot of challenges still to really be drilled out there. A lot of organizations are really struggling to figure out how we can do that. But ultimately, what we can see within the data are patterns, and we can see usage profiles within data. We can see how data is being used and ultimately abused at the same time. So we feel certainly where we see the opportunity is back in the center, being able to identify the information that our teams are using, and then looking for what's happening with that data, looking for unusual access profiles against information, and looking for altering behavioral triggers within that. And obviously that, from a technology perspective, brings us very far down the road in terms of the type of technology we need to be applying in the future. And I think there's a very big demand for organizations to be really pushing the boundaries in some sense, around machine learning, around AI, in terms of what they can apply to help identify, where there may be challenges. I think the other very obvious thing is that data has gone online and it's gone out the door, and that's here to stay. Where organizations historically may have had some reticence to putting some of their key assets, making that available in such a way through need rather than anything else, in necessity that has occurred. So I think there's a real need, as we see it, for the CRO and the CDO to be working very closely together, both to marry the use of data and the risk that information is bringing, and ensuring that they're looking at the new risk surfaces that COVID has introduced, and ensuring that they are applying the best technology to reduce that, while we grapple with the surveillance question, which I know we'll probably get on and discuss in depth as well.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And maybe Nitzan, from an inside the bank perspective, how should firms be updating their control frameworks and infrastructures to ensure that they're remaining compliant?
So first of all, I agree with Simon on the data and technology point. I think certainly these are critical areas, and I think Simon covered it well, so I won't repeat these points. But I think, first of all, emphasis on culture and values. I think, at the end of the day, even if you put your monitoring, amazing level of monitoring around 21 communication platforms, if somebody wants to do something, they'll go on the 22nd and do it, right? So the one important point, you really want to make sure that your employees are adhering to your sort of values and doing the right thing. The other thing is, of course, around policies and procedures. So, it's clear that we need to update them. It's clear that we are now working under a different operating model. But I think, a critical element for us is to also track the adoption. So, it's not enough just to put some instructions out there and to put some training material and that's that. I think, we need to be in close communication with the business and the teams, and it needs to be reasonable as well. So I think, if we were to put out a policy that says, you have to work within an environment where there is nobody else in a radius of 2 kilometers from you, that's just not going to be feasible. So, you want to enable people to really work with you, and you want to create, and again, coming back to the culture piece, an environment where if that's not doable for them, they feel comfortable raising that with you, and you can together work on a model that is suitable for everyone. Same with regards to the tools and the kit, right? So again, you want to make sure that people won't go off using their own personal devices just because the corporate one isn't good enough for their needs. Last point I will just say is something that we have seen personally, and I think others in the industry as well. I think just collaboration between the different lines of defense is a really important point. So first line, second line, and of course third as well. Just working together is also an important point for me.
Yeah, I totally support that. I think we'll certainly come back to that point a little bit later in the conversation. I see we've had a couple of questions come in, and they're very relevant to this content part, so I'm going to drop them in now. The first one, very much Nitzan and David are probably best suited to answer. The questions come in that said, what have you learned about your compliance teams while working from home, and what skills and expertise do you consider important in this new working environment? Either of you like to take that? Have we seen any particular change? Do you think the skills that are on offer are fit for purpose? Or do you think there needs to be some evolution there too?
I mean, go on.
I can say with regards to the skills, I think there is if moving to working in this environment just by definition means that we need to move to working with more advanced technology and advanced tools. We're going to monitor more communication, more channels, more data, unstructured data. That means we're going to need advanced technology. And then I think the sort of skill set that people needs to have changes a bit. So the way they look at alerts is going to be slightly different. I think we really need people with investigative skills. I don't think there is this argument around whether firms need to have large data scientists teams. So my personal view is that it's possible, but it's not mandatory. So I don't think every bank should have a large data scientist team to tune their solutions. I think this is something that can be done with the vendor or in other ways. But I think the approach to the alerts and training the alerts, that skill set is going to be slightly different to what we are seeing today.
I think I would just add, nothing like a good crisis to see where your colleagues land, right? And you see some who don't like the crisis, want to go back to the way that it was, and you see those that see it as an opportunity. I mean, I'll be maybe a bit controversial and say, compliance officers and advanced technology don't always go hand in hand, maybe, but I think compliance officers are beginning to realize that reliance on spreadsheets and them being able to hold everything in their head is kind of the days are starting to pass, right? We need technology to be able to start doing some of the heavy lifting and some of that crunching of the numbers and the data, so that they can provide the insight. The days are gone where you spend 90% of your time just trying to grasp where on earth the data is and bring it together. What you should be doing, and the reason why we pay compliance officers what we pay them because of their experience, is that we need the insight that they can provide from the data that's been gathered. And that's where the technology increasingly will need to come to bring that together, I think.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just bring up another question here, and just to set the scene there, I think we're talking about in order for the programs to operate to their optimum level, we're talking about good technology, good people, good data. I think all three of those are possibly equally important. But one of the questions that's come in, again, thank you for submitting, is which tools for managing compliance have increased in importance during this pandemic and have been of most value? Who fancies taking that one on?
I guess from our perspective, I'm not going to plug our own tool set, okay? But what we've seen, are two levels. First of all, that oversight and control. So the ability to really map, from the regulatory perspective, get that mapped. But it's not about understanding where you have to comply those regulations, but it's starting to put that into practice against the data. So it's all very well, being able to label a regulation and say we must comply with this, but where's the evidence of how you're doing that? Where are the boots on the ground being able to show the controls that are in place and report against that? And we certainly see, from our perspective, that that's what customers are asking for. It's that ability to not just know what regulations they have to comply with, but actually prove. And again, it comes back to Nitsan's point around the first, second, and third lines of defense all really working together and being able to not only put the control in place, but then feed that through from an audit perspective and ensuring that that feedback's there. So we're seeing a very much that second tier down, that application being really important at the minute.
Okay, thank you, Simon.
Yeah.
Yes, Mark.
Oh no, I was going to just quickly jump in there. We've obviously got a number of solutions that we offer to our clients, and immediately, as Nitsan's point earlier in the conversation was about the volatility that obviously occurred earlier in the year, and that drove a lot of people obviously to looking at the vast amount of false positives that they had. And from that point, we started to get a lot of inquiries from our client base and prospective prospects, obviously looking at the trade surveillance piece and looking at how, I'd argue some of the advanced products out there were able to calibrate out some of the market shocks that occurred. Now, that was kind of earlier on in the year. The slow burner that has been then happening for us across the years is regarding kind of code of ethics and employee compliance products. So, how do you access, how do employees submit personal trade requests? How do they complete their various attestations that they have, disclosed the number of brokerage accounts that they have on a regular basis? Those kind of service offerings that we've had a vast kind of increase in people coming to us, and then actually from there people have said, how does this marry into something like a trade surveillance solution? Can you get some of those unstructured or almost separated and siloed data points into your trade surveillance solution, so you can marry up what your employees are doing against what the firm may be doing?
Okay, thank you. That leads quite nicely onto the topic that's been burning for a little while in the world of surveillance, that sort of golden bullet of holistic surveillance. And I think that the move to having people away from the office, reliant on that culture and people making the right decisions when it comes down to the behaviour that they are demonstrating. Does the panel think that a holistic approach or an integrated approach to surveillance is perhaps the right answer to address that risk? Perhaps David, you'll lead us off on this one.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes, and there's been a lot of discussion around it. But there again, what does holistic actually mean? I think stepping back a little bit, I think we like to be very certain of things. We don't like ambiguity, and I think that's the space we are living in at the moment. We want to kind of go, right, okay, this has happened. Let's just answer it. How do we embed remote working? Let's just get on with it. And we don't know yet, right? There is no vaccine out. It's coming supposedly. We don't know how long it's going to take to roll out. You've got various people saying, oh, we could be back to normal this time next year. Okay, that's 12 months away. And that's before anything else happens, assuming that the world stays nice and level, no other crisis. They're a bit like buses. They all tend to come along at once. So we're kind of trying to get the answers all at once. Whereas I think we've got to live with that ambiguity as a first point. I think in terms of then holistic surveillance, my thing, yes, I think we do. I think there are so many channels. I think part of the problem with compliance is we always end up saying no. No, you can't do that on WhatsApp. No, you can't do that. We've got to turn it around. We've got to be in a position where we just say yes to everything. Well, that means we've got to be able to, and yes means, yes, we can monitor that channel. That's fine, yep, no problem. Now that then starts becoming into that kind of holistic surveillance. How do you start saying to your business, yeah, we're not really worried what channel you need to talk to your clients in. We can monitor it. We have to be able to monitor it. So you can go off and do what you need on WhatsApp or WeChat or Signal or whatever it happens to be, as long as we can consume the feed and make sure that we are looking at that feed and making sure we are compliant with all the necessary regulations. So I think that's kind of where the holistic surveillance piece will start going, together with potentially the need to orchestrate some of this stuff. I think we've got that potential problem of with replacing all these spreadsheets with all these applications. If we're not careful, we're going to have like 20 applications on our desktop rather than 20 spreadsheets. So how are we going to orchestrate all of this and ensure that, again, you get back to that word of holistic, right? How do you, the journey goes left to right. It doesn't go top to bottom, right? Because of your hierarchy, because of your team structure, right? You start on the left, you move to the right. Something happens, you start looking at the comms. So how do we start orchestrating all that so that when something happens, we can see along the length of the journey? I think that's where the holistic piece starts coming together.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps, Mark, if I could come back to you, just to revert back to your previous answer with adding sort of data points in against trade surveillance, or I think was the point you were raising. Is that holistic surveillance in your mind?
I think it's one of a small part of what will become known as holistic surveillance. I think, give it another 5-10 years at the way technology is evolving, we're all going to feel like, we're in Minority Report with a big glass screen, when you're just waving apps around. But yes, we've, a couple of years ago, holistic surveillance was all about marrying e-coms with your trade surveillance alerts. I don't think people have managed to actually get to that stage yet. I think a number of firms are closer than others. And that really stems that there are a lot of organizations that were good at one thing, and I think they've tried to expand across a couple of verticals. And I think where they've got to now is they've kind of gone, well, actually, we're good at this, that we're best of breed here. And, we've had the technology, open APIs, and our big thing. And I think most vendors now support open APIs. So that interconnectivity between different data sources, both for structured and unstructured data, is going to help to create what is holistic surveillance. But for us here at ACA, I think it's more than just comms. I think it is, and we've talked about in the panel that it was, they were concerned with some of the employee behaviors. So that comes down to their personal account trading. It comes down to the use of language. It comes down to, are they submitting their attestations on time, or have they become a bit rogue with what they're doing in terms of the rest of their day job? All of those data points, when you put together, I hate to use the word of, you almost get your employee fingerprint, but you get a very good understanding of what is normal for your employee, so you can begin to identify potential conduct risk. And e-coms and ACOMs are just going to be a part of that big picture.
Okay, thank you. We had a question come in on this particular topic. I think Simon and Nitzan, just before you answer, you can perhaps address it as part of your response. So the question that's come in is, does holistic surveillance point to the need for a true compliance dashboard rather than those 20 apps that David mentioned in his answer?
I can say for me, it's more than that. So it's not just about consolidating everything into one place. It's really about taking all of the events into account to create this one big notion of whether something has happened. So by that, I mean, today or traditionally, we look at what I would call event-based surveillance, right? So we would look at this one particular phone call or one particular email or trade. And I think, the true holistic surveillance, and we're not quite there yet, but we eventually will, would be when we join up multiple events to create this picture. And that picture will tell you, what sort of risk are you facing with that individual, with that environment. And that is going to be much bigger than each and every single activity that may be suspicious. So for me, that is where things are likely to go.
Okay. Yeah. Perhaps, Simon, you can add this to your answers. Another question there, they're flying in. So as part of that piece, the next question that's coming relates to the vendor themselves, and what should firms be looking for in a vendor when it comes to the holistic surveillance, this integrated holistic surveillance conundrum?
Yeah, and I think that it's really, really interesting, because that's where, as a vendor who's obviously providing, risk alerting and monitoring, when I look at what we've been doing and where our drivers are, it maps exactly onto the questions and the comments that the panel have made. To David's point, that concept of the 20 different applications, and mapping that onto the conversation point around the dashboards. Really, vendors need to be providing the information that's required. So getting information on the things that we identify that contribute to that enterprise risk dashboard are really important. But beyond that, I mean, and that's effectively saying, it's not about what we do, but it's about understanding we feed part of an overall view of the business. And then that's about interoperability. And certainly over the last 6 months, we've spent a lot of time working with partners in the same space, all working collaboratively together, because we know that's how we best answer the organization's requirements. There's no point us coming in and saying, we solve all your problems. We know we don't. We're excellent at solving a few of your problems, but as a range of additional collaborative partners all looking at regulations, we know we can solve a lot of problems, and it's ensuring that we are both the information is flowing between RegTech organization, but also then combining and flowing into that enterprise risk dashboard so that people can get that insight, can understand that event and how that maps right across the organization, and not just, we found some risk in some area of unstructured information. It's how does that map into the whole journey?
Okay, thank you. Just before we move on, there's a couple of questions in there which I'm going to paraphrase slightly. And maybe, Simon, you're the perfect person to start with this one, and we'll see what facial expressions we get from the industry practitioners themselves. But the building of integrated holistic surveillance, the interaction or the integration between comms and trade surveillance, or mapping together those data points, it's hard. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. It's expensive. How do we sort of wade through those challenges around the cost side and the time that it's going to take to get these programs operational?
Yeah, and there's no getting away from any of those things. They're all true. I think where we have seen it work within organizations is actually not so much about the technology, but it's about the relationship and the approach that the organization takes. So I would say our best customers don't call us a vendor, they call us a partner. And it's that holistically working together. And it's not about, what does your technology do? It's let's all sit down, let's talk about the problems together and let's solve for them. And that is not, again, as I just really iterated in the last answer, that's not us working with them exclusively. That's understanding, their risk profile. All of the regulators, some of our customers will have over 300 regulators that they're facing off against. So how on earth do you ever get on top of that? And it's open dialogue, it's open API, it's an open approach to this. On the converse of that is ultimately it's about control. So everything's great being open, but we're talking about risk here. We're talking about substantial financial services organizations giving RegTechs access to their data, and you don't do that lightly is ultimately the answer. So ensuring that the RegTech organizations understand that, for ourselves, ensuring that we have every compliance standard that we can possibly get our hands on, providing very regular penetration testing. All of those come into the mix, and working with an ecosystem of people with the same capability, but equally the same consideration and care for your data as you have, I think is key.
Okay. Either Nitzan or David want to come in on that point? It's expensive, it's hard. That's why we're not all just switching on integrated holistic surveillance solutions. I think we're all in agreement that that's definitely the way we want to go. What's stopping, holding us up?
Well, we all work for financial institutions that have got to keep budgets and costs in mind, right? So I think a lot of it, as Simon mentioned, comes down to focusing on the priorities and the problems, and they will be individual to each organisation. There'll be certain areas you've got covered, other areas that maybe you've not got covered so well. So I think you need to focus on that. I mean, unless you've had the regulator walk in and sort of like slap your wrist over something, then it's one of those things where spending a couple of million on something when the best you're going to get is hopefully not a fine, right, is, you know, that's a hard business case to try and justify. None of us want to do that, and that's where it's like, and that's where you see a lot of people say that this is not a competitive space, right? We're all sat here going, please don't let us be the one that gets the fine, right? But we're all trying to do the same thing, right? We're all trying to meet the market abuse regulations. So there is that sense that, you know, we can come together more and collaborate more as organisations, both on the buy side and the sell side of things. But yeah, back to Simon said, you know, focusing on the problems and the priorities, I think, and then using your dollars wisely.
Okay. So, do we see these advancement of the RegTech solutions, the vendors, the partners that are coming to the table? Do they see them as being key to the success in this post-pandemic working environment? Nitsan, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I think the answer is absolutely yes. I think, you know, post the pandemic, I mean, there are certain channels that you just can't monitor if you're not using advanced technology. So if you're looking at your audio communications, you can't, you know, you need to do your speech to text. You need to do something to be able to, you know, run against that data set. And you're not going to be able to do that without using advanced technologies. And the other thing, I mean, in general, and again, post-pandemic as well, but the volume of data and the different types of data, types of platforms, you know, is just increasing. And we discussed the false positive alerts, and I saw somewhere stats that, you know, for e-coms, we're talking roughly 96 or 99% of false positive alerts across, you know, organizations. So you have to have these tools to be able to bring these numbers down, because it's not going to be feasible in the future to run through it. And of course, it's completely inefficient to do it. So I think, you know, absolutely it is critical. I think, you know, we need to be mindful that some people think that, you know, you buy these solutions, you plug them in, and that's, you know, there you go, you're good to go. But I think, you know, we do need to be mindful that, you know, technology alone isn't the answer. You really need to understand your risks, and you really need to pick, you know, the solutions that would best suit your particular situation. And also, I've seen, you know, poor implementations of, you know, such solutions because people don't fully appreciate that with machine learning solutions, the solution is as good as your training program, right? So you have to properly train it. You have to, you know, push enough data so that, you know, it actually works. So you need to have the right people, and you need to invest in that set of training. So absolutely, we need to adopt, but I think, you know, we just need to be mindful that it's not just a plug and play type scenario.
I think perhaps you can expand a little bit on that. I think historically with rule-based, static rule-based surveillance tools, it very much was a plug and play, and that's what was perhaps the direction you were looking to go in. It sounds that you're seeing the next generation of technology solutions being more of that partnership, as Simon alluded to earlier. Is that the approach now, or is there still an ideal for the plug and play as well as the sort of build in that collaborative way with the vendor client relationship?
I think we do see a lot more SaaS solutions. So, you know, plug and play from the technical front, in terms of it's much easier to introduce a new solution, the deployment itself, and, you know, of course, it being on the cloud. So there are various elements that make it technically plug and play, if you will. So, you know, you install it and it works type scenario. But in order to make it effective for your particular organization, you really need to have a proper tuning program in place. And I do think this is something you can do with the vendor and should do with the vendor. I think it's, you know, it's a collaboration, but you have to have your own specialists, and you have to have people running through the alerts, running through the output, and training the algorithm and training the solution to be aligned to your particular risks and risk appetite.
Okay, thank you. We've mentioned on a few occasions this sort of advancement of being able to monitor unstructured data, and sort of moved away from the structured side, but that's fine. I'm sure that that's just a pendulum swing that we're talking about. When it comes to that sort of integrating the unstructured data side, or how do we monitor for the unstructured data better than we have in the past. Mark, your background on the trade surveillance side will have seen very much that sort of more rules-based, and you'll have gone through that journey as others have. But how do you, what sort of advice can you share around the unstructured data side?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. As you said, there are a number of firms actually that hadn't even got comfortable with monitoring the structured data. So, and they're still on that journey. But when it comes to unstructured data, it's really being able to maybe look at the partners that are out there, who you're going to partner with, the kind where they sit in the ecosystem. Are they a retention system? Obviously, a lot of the new entrants to the marketplace have come with the new technologies, the NLP, the machine learning, and it's important to actually then understand your business and the risks that you're really trying to identify. And work with a vendor, as Nitsan says, work with a vendor, I think, in a real partnership to understand both your trading behavior, the way you communicate with colleagues, with the marketplace, and make sure that what your vendor or the technology solutions are actually giving you as output is correct, and how that evolves. I think, one of the things I used to get as a vendor is people say to me, do you have AI built into your solution? And, if I said yes to some firms, it would have been a box ticking exercise. They could never then ask me detailed questions about that. It was obviously for them, they could tick a box, maybe that would increase the budget, but I would never want to be on their side when a regulator comes in and says, can you explain to me why this happened? And they went, well, the black box told them to do it. So I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of clients have to be, very aware of, is what the machines are able to do in the background, and being able to always communicate that back to the regulator. Now, saying that, the regulator has adopted a lot of this technology. The increase of supervisory technology, or subtech, has really just come on leaps and bounds over the last few years, and they are looking at both unstructured data and a lot of structured data. So you from the client side really have to almost have a better understanding of what they're looking to, what they're analyzing, and how your program can be in step with what they're looking to analyze.
Thank you. Appreciate the clock is running against us now, and thank you to everybody that has submitted questions. I've tried to get through as many as we can. I apologize if we haven't quite covered yours yet, but maybe just in summary from the session, where we've certainly touched on a huge number of points. I'll give all of the panelists an opportunity, perhaps in 60 seconds, to share with the audience today what their top takeaway would be, if you could leave one message with them. Maybe ladies first. Nitsan, would you like to start?
Sure. So I think the pandemic, obviously, it has various different negative implications for us in compliance and in general, the world. But I think there is a positive side to the story from a compliance standpoint. And I think it's with regards to the RegTech adoption. So I think in the past, it wasn't very clear from the regulators how happy were they with us using these advanced technologies. And, as Mark mentioned, the explainability and everything, that was a concern. And even if we got comfortable with using a particular solution, we weren't sure that the regulator is happy with us going down that route. And the same goes with cloud solutions, for example. And I think the pandemic has kind of forced the regulator to express their opinion on these topics, and it's actually been quite positive. And they were openly saying not only that it's okay to use it, we expect you to use it, and we are using it ourselves. And so when they're doing their own surveillance and supervision, they are going to pick up things using these techniques, and therefore that has given a push to organizations to use these tools themselves. So to me, that is a positive point, and it's going to drive efficiency and effectiveness in the industry as a whole.
Great, thank you very much. David, let's stick with the industry first, and we'll come outside.
Yeah, sure. I think I think living with, as I said before, living with the ambiguity. I don't think we're through this yet. I don't think we truly know the direction of travel. So I think you're going to have to live with that ambiguity without knowing. But that shouldn't mean that you should be frozen in place. You know, you need to get going. You need to understand your problems. Got to get in and love that problem, right? And then work out what the priority is, and start, right? Take that agile approach, right? Get going. You can start. You can build something from a minimum viable product approach. See how the world is going to adapt. How adaptive you can be to the changes that are probably still going to come. But get going. Get going. Start sorting your problems out. But keep one eye on the future, on the strategy, and how the world continues, you know, to evolve in this pandemic.
Okay, super. Thank you, David. Simon, one point I remember you saying right back at the start here, we might touch on the topic of privacy. I'm not sure if that quite makes it into your final takeaway, but perhaps just to sort of bring it back to the table, just in case it can do, and maybe you give us your final point.
Sure. Yeah, and privacy, you know, is increasing all the time. We just look at the, you know, data protection acts around the world that have been established over the last 12 months, even, and the level of visibility it gets even in mainstream media. So, you know, privacy is a big challenge, and it's certainly here. And the reality of privacy is, you know, that organizations need to take it seriously. Personal privacy is a big deal, and when we're dealing with people's data, you know, that there is nothing higher, and it does feed in. I mean, in terms of where we see things, the ability to help an organization take control of privacy controls is equal, you know, to meeting the FCA regs in terms of importance these days, and it's certainly sitting at the boardroom. You know, our kind of, my closing thoughts are really around that data, and I think, you know, if we want to comply with regulations, we need to understand the data that we have and make sure that we're in control of it. The risk that's contained within your data, whether that's your structured data or your unstructured, unless you have a handle on it, you don't know what your exposure is. So, you know, we need to understand what we have. We need to understand why we have that data, and we really need to gain insight into that so that we can, you know, look at it from a compliance perspective. And I think the thing in these conversations we often miss is that the reality, if we can understand the data, we can actually start to ask it questions that are more about value that we can add to the business. So it's not all about negative, it's not all about control and trying to subvert things, but actually our data is rich. It is who we are, and what can we ask the data to be better organizations. And that's a key outcome that I think everybody should look for in this, not just about how do I stop things happening.
Great, thank you very much. Mark, is there anything you'd like to add to those key points we've heard from the rest of the panel?
I think they're great points, and you know, I would echo the sentiment. You know, as Simon pointed out, you have to be in control of your data. You've got to know what you've got. You've got to be able to identify the risks. So for me, it's really, you know, trying to build that unique window into your firm, making sure you're able to identify anomalous behavior. You know, identify behavioral patterns and changes to those patterns, and really from a compliance perspective, become, you know, almost a central body across the organization, provide the firm-wide transparency into the business for both managerial as well as, you know, when that filter downs, and you can affect cultural change across the organization.
Fantastic. I think that's a great finishing point. Listen, thank you to all the panelists today for your open and detailed responses throughout. Really appreciate it. I'm sure that the audience have too. And with that, I'd just like to hand back to Andrew. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Fantastic job moderating that very lively session for a Friday afternoon, I would say. I was going to make a joke about having dragged all the panelists in to do this event on a day they'd usually be working from home, but then of course they are working from home. But there you go, that's the best I could do on a Friday afternoon. It's been a marathon session, not this panel, of course. This panel went very, very quickly, but day 5 of the RegTech Summit Virtual and this really now brings the whole conference to a close. So thank you all very much. This panel, your thoughts and insights are very, very welcome and very much on point. What actually struck me was across all of the sessions, the emphasis on getting the data right, so that we can get on with the job of doing the analysis of the data came across pretty much in every day. So it's clearly something that we need to spend more time focusing on. I hope that you found the content informative and useful this week. We would be very keen to hear from you on what you thought of both the topics and the format of this virtual event. Obviously, our intention has been to bring you as much useful insight as possible without overwhelming people in this virtual format. We are aware of sort of virtual overload. So we've tried to break things up and spread them evenly over the course of this week. But yeah, we'd like to hear your feedback, as that will help us as we design future events. And on that point, we expect to be back in the new year. Could be in person, could be virtual, could be some mix of both. It remains to be seen. I would say that we've been greatly encouraged by the performance of our new platform. Indeed, I'm so pleased with it that I'm thinking of using it to launch an A-Team TV channel if I'll be allowed to. Sounds very exciting. Exclusive news and analysis, features, mini documentaries, interviews. I love the idea. Again, let us know what you think. In the meantime, as I've mentioned a couple of times in earlier sessions, we are making our platform available to third parties seeking to run their own events. So if that's of interest to you, please get in touch. Okay, so that leaves it really for me to thank once again all of our speakers and panelists for their generosity in sharing their expertise and experience. And of course, to our sponsors who have made this week's proceedings possible. They are listed here on the screen. We have really appreciated your support, and we hope that our sponsors have all got value from their participation. We certainly look forward to working with you again on future events. Finally, I would like to extend my thanks to Lorna Van Zyl and Jerry-Ann McEwen and the rest of the A-Team conference team for all their hard work, which has made this event a great event, and it has really made my life quite easy on this one. So that's it for me. Thanks once again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.